Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in a couple of minutes, just waiting for a few people to get online. I know it's early for those of you joining from the Americas, but I can see a couple of people there coming from the US and elsewhere. And I'm glad we finally have a time that our friends in Australia, East Asia, and the Pacific can actually make. While we are waiting for people to join, just because it sometimes takes a minute or two, just going to do a quick poll to see where people are coming in from. This is also being streamed live on Facebook, and I know we have a lot of people joining in live over Facebook, and we'll be recording the session because I know for a lot of our people joining, this wasn't the most convenient time, but I know there's a lot of interest, so we'll definitely be recording this session to be viewed online afterwards. I can see yet again for the fourth time in a row, the Caribbean is our best represented region, which is really interesting. I guess that's not surprising with our partnership with OECS, but I'm impressed again, given the time zone, that our Caribbean folk are very committed. And I know that having just spoken to Audrey before the call, she mentioned that she's recently had meetings with several leaders of the OECS countries during the recent UNGA. Okay, I'll just end that and share. So we can see actually Europe just beat the Caribbean slightly, but not surprising given the time zone. And hopefully we'll have a few more people join in as we're going along. Another quick poll just to see what sector people are joining from. Always interesting. Obviously, this is a more government-oriented panel to see what type of background has attracted people to this one. Seems that given the energy panels we've got, I know that energy is going to be one of the most popular ones this week. And after this session, we also have an Arctic session. So, okay, NGO, public sector, academia, rough split between those. But we'll get started now. So delighted, as you know, to be joined by Minister Audrey Tang. She is the Digital Minister of Taiwan and a radical in democracy and using digital technology to empower people. I think it's going to be a fascinating talk, and there's going to be a lot of interesting applicabilities for all of you joining from around the world. Audrey's going to get started in a second. In the meantime, feel free to drop a quick introduction, everyone, in the chat box so we know who you are, where you're from, and what you're joining, what your interests are, sorry. But Audrey, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, I'll hand over to you.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and have a very good local time, everyone. And there's quite a few people introducing themselves on the Zoom chat room. Please continue to do so. And local time here is 6 p.m., so exactly 12 hours apart from Puerto Rico. Now, I'm really happy to share with you some thoughts around digital social innovation. And because we have like 53 minutes, so I won't monopolize all the time here. I'll just give a really quick tour of what we've been doing in Taiwan in terms of digital social innovation. And if there's at any point you would like me to stop at a certain slide, explain a little bit better, or have any questions, please do feel free to just ask me on the Zoom so we can make this an interactive experience. Now, as some of you know, our president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, has been our president for almost 4 years now. And she said something I think really inspiring in her inauguration speech. She said, whereas before, when we think of democracy, we think it as a clash between two opposing values. Now we must think about democracy as a conversation between diverse values. And indeed, Taiwan being an island on the Pacific with a population of 23 million, we've had quite a few conversations around our different values. As with all other countries, we are facing, for example, economic prosperity, versus environmental sustainability, as well as innovation on technologies and sciences versus social justice and distribution, so on and so forth. And in the traditional way of thinking about public service, this rope in the middle is like the career public service that are really absorbing all the tension and making sure that it doesn't break, but they have to talk with organizers on both parts and try to strike a good balance. However, there's a recent social innovation that renders this kind of governance impractical, and that is a simple invention of a hashtag. With a hashtag, instead of traditional organizers, anyone can become an organizer to organize, say, hashtag #MeToo, hashtag climate strike, hashtag you name it, and essentially just get thousands of or hundreds of thousands of people's attention and just form their own horizontal organization. And so the government, if we're stuck in the role of just talking to finite number of stakeholders, we will be just swamped under those emerging technologies. And so in Taiwan, using digital technologies, we're trying a different set of questions around governance. Instead of asking for each emerging technology, who are the main organizers and how to make arbitration among them, which is proving to be more and more impossible, we're now asking, given our different positions, do we have some common values? And given the common values, are there innovations that can deliver for the benefit of everyone? Now, I understand this is a little bit abstract, so I'll start with one example. Here, what you're seeing here is my office. It is the Social Innovation Lab in Taipei City. And the soccer field you see here is actually drawn by people with Down syndrome, with trisomy differences. Turns out that while we see the world through the lens of text and numbers, they see the world through the lens of geometry and topology. And so just setting up this space like this and allowing everybody every Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. to talk to me for 40 minutes at a time, it actually ensures that we have a healthy conversation and direct ministerial access to all those emerging issues. And all the conversation with me are radically transparent, meaning that we co-edit the transcript for 2 weeks and then we publish everything to the internet. And so if we don't do radical transparency, obviously people talk about their private interests, but because of radical transparency, people talk about the social norm, the public good, the global goals. It's very kind of magical. Now, I'm using one example to illustrate what I mean by value-based norm-first architecture. Around a year and a half ago, there's quite a few people meeting me in my Wednesday office hour. And one of them from MIT Media Lab showed me these self-driving tricycles. Now, these are self-driving cars, but they're not your usual self-driving cars. First of all, it's rather slow and it won't hurt people when it bumps into walls or something. But the more important thing is that those persuasive electric vehicles, they're entirely open source, meaning everybody can change how it thinks. It's open hardware, meaning people can change its parts without getting sued. And then it's open data. So because of that, they want to run some hackathons, asking the local people what they would like to do with those self-driving tricycles instead of imposing any particular order on the society. And this is our way of saying that we want to figure out the social norm, what is considered normal when interacting with these creatures before we jump to the law, often made by lawmakers who don't have first-hand experience. Now, while we're running the hackathon here, there's just happens to be an elderly couple that just bought some flowers from a nearby Jianguo flower market, and they walk by and say, "Hey, Minister, what are you doing with these shopping carts?" Because it turns out that it looks like really much like a shopping cart from their perspective. I'm like, these are not usual shopping carts. They follow around. And they're like, oh, of course. Then can I just place the flowers that I bought into the basket here? And once it's almost full, can I summon another one to join the fleet so I can keep shopping? And at the end of it, maybe I hop on one and it drives me home, but it's kind of a byproduct. And the great thing about this kind of social expectation is that these are not really designed to be serving as shopping cart fleets, but because of open hardware and open source, everybody can just tweak it to fit their needs without asking for permissions from the MIT Media Lab where it came from. And so we just changed how it looks, shifting from one eye to two eyes, make it possible so that it understands people's nonverbal expressions, emotions, gestures, and so that they can co-domesticate with people to actually fit the social need of the local people. And because of that, this is unlike a traditional off-the-shelf hardware or so-called smart city solutions, but rather it empowers smart citizens to make sure that people can actually go ahead and outline their common goals and values and have the technologists work toward people's identified needs. And through this way, we achieve effective partnerships just by virtue of people just keeping talking with one another and identifying their common needs. And so I mentioned hackathons. This may be a kind of new word for some people here. So I'll explain. A hackathon is a hacking marathon. A marathon is what we keep doing for 1 day, for 2 days, for 3 days. And to hack something means that to turn it from something that's designed for one purpose into whatever you want it to serve a different purpose, a more global purpose, a more public purpose. So anyway, just to make it so that it fits your purpose. Now, the Presidential Hackathon is us taking the hackathon model and making sure that the hackathon itself takes place at the presidential office every year. And the presidential hackathon is a 3-month process, just rewarding people to put out new, interesting problems for people across the sectors to solve. So this may be one of the issues that some people around islands care about. This is about a secure water use efficiency and fresh water supply. A year ago, when we first did our presidential hackathon, one of the 100 or so teams are from the Taiwan Water Corporation. They call themselves water savior because they save water, you see. And these are the skills people that wears these kind of helmets and listen to each and every, sometimes plastic pipelines to make sure they're not leaking. And if they're leaking, of course, their job become creative and they solve those leaking points. But on average, it takes 2 months between a water leak occurs and they get listened to by those touring people. And also because their work is mostly just listening to pipes that are not leaking. So it makes recruitment actually kind of challenging for the Taiwan Water Corporation to recruit young people who care enough to work this job. Now, so their presidential hackathon idea is very simple. They said, why don't we just make a chatbot? A chatbot is something that's like on WhatsApp or online that those repairs people can just have an apprentice that's a robot. And every time they wake up, the robot can tell them, oh, I think these are the 3 nearby points that are most likely leaking. And why don't you just go ahead and check those first? And after 3 months of co-creation with the civil society, with academic experts and so on, they develop a machine learning model that based on the water pressure and water flow can very quickly identify within 48 hours actually, the next leaking point and with very good accuracy. So because of this, it used to take 2 months, but now takes only 2 days for the Taiwan Water Corporation to detect a new leak in the pilot region that they test, which is the Keelung region. Now, oftentimes, when there's a good public sector innovations like this that's proven in some pilot, the next challenge is whether they will get political will, the blessing from the Director General or from the Minister to scale it out or scale it up, and to ensure that there's sufficient cross-ministerial communication to make it happen. Now, for Presidential Hackathon, we don't give out cash award. There is no prize money. Rather, each of the 5 winning teams gets a trophy. The trophy looks a little bit like the Sustainable Development Goal, but at its end, at its bottom, there is this small projector. And after you turn on the projector, the trophy projects the image of our president handing the trophy to the team. So this is very meta. But for the public sector people, that's exactly what they need. If their director general say, oh, we don't have budget for it, they just turn on the projector and our president appears and suddenly there's budget for it. If the minister said, oh, why don't you, talk to other ministries first? This is cross-ministerial collaboration work. It's a lot of time. You just turn on the projector and summon the president and then your minister will begin to work. And so there's a question coming in right now from Berit Moore saying, how do you spread the news about the hackathon and make sure that I reach all levels? This is a great question. So whenever there is a call to action for the public sector innovation, we meet in the presidential office with all the different branches, the administrative, the judiciary, the examination, the control yuan, all the branches, and make sure that each and every branch talk to each and every ministries about this public sector innovation. So we invite all the relevant ministers, and we also have a participation platform called Join, the GOV, the TW, Joint Government Taiwan. And this participation platform has 10 million active users, unique users, not visits, unique users out of 23 million citizens in Taiwan. And so anything that is spread by the joint platform immediately reaches almost 1/2 of our population. Of course, we want to make sure we don't spam them too much. But in any case, both from the citizen side using the joint platform, as well as from the public sector side by making sure that all the relevant ministries get an announcement about Presidential Hackathon. Every year we succeeded in getting hundreds of really good high quality submissions. Now, as I explained, the idea here is that the presidential trophy represents the presidential promise that whatever they have done during the 3 months as a pilot, we make sure that the president promised to include that in our national policy within a year. So no matter the personnel needs, no matter regulatory needs, no matter whatever needs that this project makes, we actually make sure that we go ahead and just implement it within a year. So that's the binding power, because they're public servants, so we can't really give them prize money, or they cannot really accept impact investment. This is actually better than impact investment because it makes sure that they can just keep innovating and we take care about the operation. And Barrett said that this is very impressive and requires a whole department to look after the platform. This is entirely true. Our National Development Council, there's an entire department that takes care of not only our open data platform, which is listed here, but also our participation platform. Now, our open data platform, exactly as a participation platform, when we say open data, we don't just mean open government data. We mean open citizen data as well. We mean open data from various other contribution sources. So for example, in Taiwan, there's this very popular citizen science project called Airbox, where almost, I think, over 2,000 stations now, citizens just donate their balcony, their schools, and so on, to make sure that people measure their PM 2.5 levels, their air quality, and write it to a shared distributed ledger, otherwise known as blockchain, so that people can be assured that people cannot go back in time and change each other's numbers. And the government, without spending a dime, actually have pretty good access to what the real-time air quality is. The government, instead of competing with the legitimacy of the people, which is impossible, we always adopt a we can't beat them, we join them approach. So because of this, we just ask the citizen scientists, where do you wish there is the air box, but currently isn't? And they're like, oh, we wanted to be in industrial parks because, you know, these are private property and we can't go ahead and install air boxes into those places. And we're like, oh, it turns out the government owns the lamps in the industrial parks. And so we can actually hang an air box in each and every lamp. And so together, we made sure that the pollution are discovered in real time, and the penalties are addressed to the people who are actually doing the pollution instead of people who are caught in the collateral damage. And so this is, everybody can participate to everybody's social good. So this is what we call social innovation. And this kind of data collaborative is, again, by itself a sustainable goal, 1718, to enhance availability of reliable data, not by people blindly trusting one department or the government, but rather using blockchain technologies and high-speed computing to make sure that everybody have equal access. If they have a good algorithm to analyze the air quality or water quality, they can do so. And so this year's Presidential Hackathon, the Airbox team actually entered the top 10 using the idea called Waterbox that can very easily measure the water pollution levels, again, using NB-IoT, which is zero-G technology, to make sure that it's very energy efficient and they can continuously write the numbers of the waterways that they measure. And there's also teams working on reducing plastic waste in the sea, currently we mostly clean them when they approach the beach, but actually using drones, using computer vision, we can analyze the likely pathways and stop them at the sea instead of when they reach our beach lines, and so on and so forth. And so this combination of assistive intelligence with collective intelligence is the kind of innovations that we permit using Presidential Hackathon. And each and every those ideas are then coded using Sustainable Development Goals into our social innovation platform so that people can continue to say, for example, Taipei City, New Taipei City have all published their voluntary local review. Taoyuan City is now working also on their voluntary local reviews, so people can find their partners that corresponds to their local reviews SDG targets and report the work that they do and contribute to our voluntary national review, which we also publish around each UNGA. So this also ensures that innovation stays open. Just one example, the Water Savior, after they announced that they solved the water efficiency, water leakage issue, they were actually invited by Wellington, by New Zealand, immediately after the Presidential Hackathon of last year to co-create a similar system for the Wellington Water Company in the next 3 months. And so this kind of solution is not just solving issues from Taiwan, but identifying the solutions and publishing it using an open innovation model enable this kind of bilateral relationships. Now for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll also talk about how it actually responds to the needs of people who are on smaller islands, because the Taiwan Islands is a string of islands. We have the Taiwan main island, we have the Pescador, Penghu, we have Kinmen, Matsu, the Orchid Islands, and a lot of islands. And we made sure that in each and every of those islands, we have what we call broadband as a human right. And by broadband, we specifically mean at least 10 megabits per second. And that means very high quality, at least 1080p video conference as the kind of video conference we're having now. And this is very important because using broadband as human right, we can make sure that no matter if you're on the highest top of the Yushan Mountain, which is for almost 4,000 meters high, or if you're in the southmost islands of Dongsha, of Taiping, and so on, the Pacific Islands, you can all have a high quality video link to Taipei, to people in the central government. So as I mentioned, every Wednesday, people can come and talk to me for 40 minutes at a time in Taipei. But on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, I go around Taiwan to visit the remote islands, the most rural places, all sorts of different places that don't have easy access through high-speed rails to Taipei. And because of that, we make sure that these rural areas meet together, and I spend maybe the night of Monday, maybe the night of Sunday and Monday, maybe 2 days just hanging out, or as we say in anthropology, making sure that there's an ethnographic link between me and the people on that rural or indigenous or remote island system. But when they gather around and have just a normal discussion in their town halls, in the places that they used to gather, we make sure that we use the broadband as human right and connect them to all the municipalities, but especially back in the Social Innovation Lab, where the 12 ministries related to their issues are at hand at a larger meeting room. And so in Taiwan, we have a saying, 见面三分情, meeting each other face-to-face builds 30% of trust. Now we know that using high definition video link actually established 20% of trust. And so the remote islanders, the people who are more rural and more indigenous, they actually just keep talking about their local issues. And I'm like the facilitator that raise their issues. Previously, they may be raising an issue that the Ministry of Interior takes and say, oh, I'll have to consult with the Ministry of Health and Welfare because this is about maybe a local clinic with only nurses and no regular doctors. And they want a video link back to the Taiwan main island to make diagnostics and even medical decisions by summoning doctors from the main island, but it's not very clear who is responsible for regulations. So they have to copy Ministry of Health and Welfare. And maybe Ministry of Health and Welfare doesn't have the hardware links, the broadband access, or even the technological know-how. So they say, oh, let's copy the Minister of Economy Affairs. But the problem with the old way of bureaucracy is that every time they copy someone, they become a reduced version, a pale shadow of the original need and stories and the lived experience, and become just abstracted, maybe 2 A4 pages or maybe 2 PowerPoint slides. And so oftentimes the ministries may think that they have solved the issue, but actually they only solve a small part of the issue. And so because of this, and also answering Ovek's question about how can such a system be rolled out in the rural areas, we make sure that we bring technology to the people rather than asking people to come to technology. So for the other 13 million of our population who is not yet on the participation platform, we make sure that we're not asking them to come to our website, but making sure that we bring our live streaming, sometimes 360 live streaming, to their town hall meetings, and make sure that the public service, if they make a decision right there, for example, to relax our telemedicine rules to make sure that nurses can actually become avatars of doctors serving in the local clinic in the offshore island, they just start brainstorming right there in the social innovation lab on the front of the people who really has the need. And there's a lot of back and forth. And the best thing about this is that for the public servant, there's no risk. If they didn't brainstorm out ideas and people get upset, well, I'm the only one in that remote island, so you can't hurt people over the screen, right? So I absorb all the risk. But if, and most times, they just resolve the issues right on the spot, well, they get a credit. This is much better than the old way of, if they do the right thing, their minister get a credit. But if they do the wrong thing, the minister can always blame public service. This replaces this payoff for the public service so that the risk is absorbed by my office, but they get a full credit when they do solve the issues as highlighted by the rural people. And so this is, I think, a answer to Ovek's, Jamaica's question about how this is being rolled out in the rural areas. Now, Juice Shreya has a really good question asking, so this is responsive inclusive, of course, but how did we get the telecom companies to cooperate with the broadband plan? I mean, it would cut into their profits, right? But only in the short term. In the long term, if because there's the broadband access, people are more willing to move back to home after they get their education. There's more companies setting up teleworking spots there. It will eventually pay for itself. But of course, that eventually maybe 5 years or 10 years down the road. And so it really takes a constitutional commitment to education, equal opportunity and education to make sure that when we're rolling out, for example, public telephone booths, all the way to our ADSL, all the way to 3G and now 4G and very soon 5G. There is a bandwidth plan when we're auctioning off the spectrums or allocating the various different licenses for telecom operators, that they have a corporate responsibility to take care of the places that are not yet 100% coverage. And only if they do so, do we grant the license. And so this is, has been a really large push after Dr. Taiwan became president, so that now on the rural and indigenous and remote places, we're now achieving 98% of coverage for at least 10 megabits per second. And this is no mean feat. I mean, in the most remote islands, we had to use satellite connection. But even though it's very expensive, it also makes sure that people are more willing to move and settle into it so that it can have better, maybe fiber optics and so on and afterwards. But if we leave out the final 2%, which is mostly in the mountains, then we don't have a really good legitimacy theory when we're rolling out those electronic participation platforms. People can always say, oh, so you do participatory voting, you do participatory budgeting, you have all those petition systems online, this is great, but why are you leaving those percents of people off? So those people now mostly around the highest mountains, over 3 kilometers high, we're nevertheless now using even helicopters to make sure that there are 4G coverage in those final 2% of areas. So this is a real commitment. Now, Ramiro would like to ask, speaking about a hackathon, what professional segments is this aimed at? This is a great question. As I showed in the data collaborative slide, mostly this is about people who can develop analytic models and algorithms, so research institute, and sometimes SMEs, but sometimes larger companies like HTC, who also have a business doing data analytics. And both of them, as well as schools and so on, can freely use the high-speed computing platform as offered by our National Center of High-Speed Computing that is even more cost-effective than the public cloud services. And part of the reason is that we just aggregate all the non-sensitive data, all the public data into the data platform by itself. So you don't have to download those real-time air data or water quality data or whatever, but you can actually just dial in to the NCHC and upload a container of your algorithm so that instead of downloading a data to run locally, you can, anyone from any high school actually can just upload their models and have the machine learning done in place in those high-speed computing centers, which has lots of GPUs. And so because of this, this is also a AI as a democratized curriculum that we're rolling out this year. What we want to do is that by now, half of the undergrads, and it's growing, can code to train machine learning models to further whatever majors that they are studying. And starting this year, we're also rolling out in high schools, very similar machine learning and data science courses. So because of that, we also have to make sure that no matter how remote you are, maybe on a very far away island, if you're a junior high school or senior high school student, you have the equal access to the computing environment that can be the contributor to the data collaborative. So the professional segment is mostly research and industry, but the schools are more and more becoming a very important contributor to this area. And there's many more questions, and I'd like to get to them. So let's look at the questions. So Berit would like to know, how did you start this whole project? Where did this come from and how long it took me? There must have been some barriers at first. This is a great question. So for me personally, I joined the cabinet as the digital minister to work with the government, not for the government, almost exactly 3 years ago. But even before that, for another 2 years or so, I've been a kind of understudy of the previous cabinet. And the reason why I joined this whole work of working with the Korea Public Service was because 5 years ago, there was a large movement here in Taiwan. And in Taiwan, we call it the Sunflower Movement, where people just went ahead and indeed occupied the parliament for 22 days. And so because of that, we made sure that people who occupy the government can, the parliament can communicate freely with people on the street and many more online. And there were around 20 NGOs that occupied the parliament because at the time the parliament were refusing to deliberate substantially a trade agreement with Beijing. And so the idea is that everybody has something to say around the Beijing deal. And so the 20 NGOs just made sure that each talked about one particular aspect of that treaty. And so this movement back in 2014 is certainly nonviolent. There was 500,000 people on the street, many more online, but they all talk about aspects of the trade deal. And over the 3 weeks of Occupy, eventually people converged on the set of what we call rough consensus, or ideas that people identify as common values and can live with. So in that sense, the demonstration was not a protest, it's a demo of how to talk about one thing substantially, making sure that people, despite our different positions, can come to common values that everybody can live with. And so the head of the parliament at the time, back in 2014, just took our consensus items and made it and ratified it. And because of that, ever afterwards in the past 5 years, we've just been working on this, what we call listening at scale technologies, to make sure that people's inputs are taken care of in the policymaking process. And that has also helped because at the end of 2014, all the mayors that supported this kind of open government's participation won mayorship, sometime without preparing inauguration speech. But everybody who did not support the Occupy or open government end up losing their mayoral bid. So because of that, ever since then, Taiwan was just using this as the national agenda. So I'm just continuing the work that they've been doing in 2015. So I hope that answered the question. And so, yeah, so the AI-powered conversations is one of the key tools that we can make sure, and this is somewhat answering Peter Rhodes' question about coming from a small remote island perspective. What are the opportunities for small and micro communities to connect and interface with mainstream initiatives? Indeed, we developed this conversation system called Polis with some entrepreneurs from Seattle at the time, but it's thoroughly open source now. Everybody can use it, exactly because we want people, even when they're participating in an Occupy movement and therefore having very limited bandwidth, can still contribute meaningfully into the policy conversations. And so this is very bandwidth effective, and I'll show you how it works. So this is a real map of people who can see on their phone. And the avatar represents their position, and they see their friends and families, their social media friends, around one particular issue. And people are clustered among the people who share similar feelings. Now, as I explained, in Taiwan, when we say open data, it means open citizen data, government data, industrial data, academic data. So we make sure that everybody is equally informed on one emerging topic like self-driving vehicles. And then after downloading those materials, which are prepared beforehand, everybody can share with one sentence, like one tweet, what they feel about it. This is often lacking from telecommunication. In a traditional town hall, a good facilitator will make sure that people are roughly in the same feeling space before moving on to brainstorming. But across the internet, it's very difficult to make sure that people resonate with one another. So most consultation forums over the internet just skip this feeling stage and jump straight from facts to ideas or solutions. But then because we made sure that we set aside 3 to 4 weeks just to get everybody's feelings on the same page. When we come to the brainstorming stage, the best ideas are the ones that take care of most people's feelings. And so it doesn't take much to then absorb those ideas and turn them into regulation. So this is how polis work in practice. For each emergent issue, every citizen can share their thoughts on it. And even if you're on a satellite link, this is just the size of a tweet. This is very bandwidth effective. And everybody entering this conversation can see one feeling from their fellow citizen and say whether they resonate or disagree with it. And as they say agree or disagree, their avatar just moves toward the people who share similar feelings. And after clicking agree or disagree for a few times, they might also want to share their feelings for other people to resonate on, and so on and so forth. So this is unlike a large, I wouldn't name names, but a large social media platform where everybody's focus is on the reply button. Once you have the reply button, people with the most times win the argument by default because they can troll people. They can make ad hominem attacks. They can paste cat pictures. Okay, I like cat pictures, but they're not very constructive to arguments. The whole idea of the polis conversation is we do away with the reply button and asking people only to resonate or not with each other's feelings. And because the server, the machine hosting this environment, is running locally, you don't have to go a round trip to a data center in one of the major cloud hosting providers who may or may not have a presence, a point of presence in your island. Rather, it can just travel to your main island, even on a local intranet, and very quickly get back a response, further adding to the kind of gamified instant gratification of this conversation. And so after making sure that people share each other's feelings and ideas for a month or so, we always get this shape. Now, if there's only one slide you can take away from this webinar, I would like it to be this slide. Oftentimes people feel that there are divisiveness across ideological bents, across parties, across the left wing, right wing, or whatever. But it turns out every time we run the polis conversation like this, people are surprised to discover actually most people agree on most of the things, most of the time, with most of their neighbors. It's just, if you only look at institutional media or indeed social media, you would think that those 5 things that people spend 95% or more of their calories on, or there it is. But actually, people agree on most of the things the government isn't doing, or the public sector, or the private, or the social sector isn't doing, and can indeed do together. So this is a real conversation that's been run in Kentucky, in the US, in Bowling Green. And people thought that they would be divided among the Democrat Republican lines. But it turns out there's only 5 statements like this. And everybody can agree that although they have science, technology, engineering, math, education, people all agree it should be STEAM, meaning art should be part of it. Now, that's actually whether you're a Democrat or Republican, everybody agrees. And so because of that, that's something that the local schools can just do without waiting for the resolution for those more divisive ideas. And so using this very bandwidth efficient way for people to express their ideas and kind of compete on the kind of resonance they can do, we make sure that all of these top consensus items that are more rough consensus, like people can live with it, eventually gets a line-by-line answer by the authorities, and to make sure that those consensus statements, some of them just turn into public policy, some of them can be done in the social or private sector, are just done in the social and private sector. And so the whole society can move along without being blocked by those 5 things that are ideological. So I think that answers somewhat Peter's question. So are there new questions? So Veronica would like to know, how can we best engage youth in SDG efforts? Again, this is a great question. So in our system, we make sure that the young people sets the direction of the nation by setting up what we call reverse mentorship. So back in 2014, I was the reverse mentor of Jacqueline Tsai, a minister, horizontal minister in charge of law at that time. So, a reverse mentor is someone who is technically an understudy or an advisor, but actually is trusted on a certain domain to lead the direction for a particular minister. And because we collaborated so well in this cabinet, we made sure that each and every ministry can appoint 1 reverse mentor. So we have 32 ministries. So at the moment, we have a National Youth Advisory Council of around 35 people. And the 35 people, most of them, 25 of them, are under 35, and most of them under 30, actually, are technically advisors to ministers, but serve actually as reverse mentors to that particular minister. And they all work within a palette of social innovation for the common good, so that they're tasked with just identifying the gaps that the government isn't quite doing to further the global goals. And they can propose every quarter to the premier, the prime minister, and make sure that the gaps that they see is driven by the premier's agenda to make them into national policy. And each and every youth advisor can also start a local conversation around one particular SDG element. We had an element about a conversation, a town hall, about how to renew older buildings and older streets. We had a conversation about how to make sure that there's a sustainable farming practice for farming oysters, actually, and making sure that they don't hurt the underground water, and can develop a 0 or even negative carbon way to make sure that they can manage the salinity of the farming, and also make sure that they can coexist well with solar panels and so on. And so each time there's a town hall like this, we make sure that there's the same supporting structure of getting the local young people and the local stakeholders into the same room, and through the telepresence also connect to the municipalities and people in the national government to again look at the issues the young people identified, and again have a point-by-point conversation around it, and finally can be made into policy by bringing them into the premier, and for the reverse mentors of the ministers to talk with the minister and ministries on the feasibility of implementing those. And so I think the young people should point a direction, while the older generation should provide the implementation. So Barrett would like to know, do you adjust your language based on whom you speak to? For example, a farmer would not understand everything the same way the academic professor would. Of course, so that is why those locally organized conversations are so important. Whether they're raised by the youth advisor, whether they're raised by a local social innovation organization, whether 5,000 people on our participation platform can start a petition, we always make sure that the relevant materials are translated into the local knowledge, the local wisdom, the local language if needed, before we have a face-to-face conversation about it. That may be the most important thing, and thank you for pointing it out, is that being inclusive is not just about including experts of different fields, but also making sure that when those experts in different fields are communicating with each other, they use the lay people's terms to communicate across disciplines instead of using their own abstract jargons, which may actually be misleading for people watching live streaming. And so this is, again, a very important language issue that we're striving to make sure. Kirsten would like to know, how do you ensure demographics who are not presently digitally engaged are taken into account? First of all, it couldn't be because they don't have broadband, because it's a human right. It couldn't be because they don't have tablets, because we make sure that our digital opportunity centers lend the fresh, like in 3 years or fresher tablets to people who are in need, who cannot afford tablets. So the lack of device and lack of connectivity should never be an excuse. If you don't have the connectivity, you can ask me, it would be my fault then. But for people who are really old, because our analysis to the e-petition platform is that people around 15 years old and people who are around 65 years old are actually the most active participants in our petition platform. First of all, these two age groups have most time on their hands, but also they care much more about public benefit instead of the people in the middle who sometimes care more about their private benefits. And so, for example, we had a petition from a 16-year-old, which is her civics class assignment actually, to ban plastic straws and other plastic one-use, single-use utensils from the circulation. And it took us by surprise because we thought it must be a very seasoned environmental activists to raise such a petition, 5,000 people in no time. But when we're meeting face to face, we understand that people who are 16-year-old, they actually understand social media very well and can organize people's common wills and actually innovate. So we arranged a meeting for her to meet with other manufacturer of those single-use plastic utensils. And they said those makers who are in their 60s now say, actually, they entered the business 30 years ago because they were social entrepreneurs. At the time, hepatitis B was very prevalent in Taiwan, and they manufactured those single-use utensils exactly to shield the public from a spreading virus. But now Hep B is fixed, it's just cured easily. So they're also looking forward to contribute more to the society. And then they brainstormed together and discovered that they have a common value, which is environmental sustainability. And so they found quite a few new materials like sugarcane leftovers, sugarcane wastes, that can actually make sure that there's a negative carbon footprint to manufacture new straws with. So actually that's where straw came from. But in any case, when you're coming to Taiwan now for indoor drinking, you'll see that the plastic straws are gone. There's a lot of organic new ways to replace them, and all of them thanks to this kind of cross-generational solidarity. Now, for people who are even older, like 75 years, 80 years or older, it is really true that they are not as digitally engaged as other people, which is why we make sure that we explain the common issues, public issues, using board games, developing those curriculums with the long-term care centers and so on, to make sure that they can still participate meaningfully. Because if they participate meaningfully, even if on a smaller scale, and if it's amplified through live streaming to the live transcription and so on, they feel that they're still contributing to the next generation, and their aging process is actually much more smooth if they can feel that they are continuously engaging in public work and public civic service. And so thank you for raising this. I think this is also very important for our long-term care. Now,
Audrey, I just want to
yes.
jump in quickly. Thank you so much for everything you've said. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm in the comments for all of this. There might be a couple of questions that you just missed under the answered column in Q&A. So Sharon Yao from Hong Kong Blockchain Society just asked a little bit about the funding. And I responded, the presumption is that this is all kind of done on the national level. So this is centralized, but I guess a follow-on question to that as well is what's happening on the kind of county or municipal level, or is obviously you're at the national level, so is it mostly happening there?
Right. So this is an excellent question. Actually, we make sure that there is 10% of the national level's funding on what we call regional revitalization, which is something that we learned from Japan. They're actually done in a participatory budgeting manner. So as long as a municipal or township can have a cross-sectoral meeting across all the different sectors to settle on a common vision, sometimes facilitated by our touring meetings, there's 10% of the national budget that's just dedicated to go and do impact investment, to do funding, to make sure there's sufficient personnel to deliver on the local agenda that's set by the local municipal or the local district level. And so while it is true that most presidential hackathon teams end up using the 90% of national budget, we're also seeing cases where the judges, who are actually seasoned impact investors or academics by themselves, actually help them figure out a self-sustaining business plan and get most of their funding from the impact investment sector as well. So I would say that maybe 70, 80% end up using the national budget, but maybe 10% uses the regional revitalization budget with matching funding from impact investment on one hand and a national development fund on the other. And the others use 100% private sector funding because they realize that the presidential hackathon idea can just pay for itself.
Yeah, and I just want to add some of the comments. So Maya Trotz said she really valued that story on the history of single-use plastics or single-use utensils. And I know that's a huge movement now in a lot of the small island developing states countries across the Caribbean and the Pacific to ban those or find ways to replace them. Christine Milne, who is the former leader of the Australian Greens and a senator for Tasmania, she'll be speaking later this week on the Climate Action Panel, said, love the idea of reverse mentors, young people with the ideas feeding into older people who are in the power to implement. Completely agree with that, Christine, as well. One quick question, we haven't got much time left. And I'm not sure how much detail you'll be able to go into this, so I'll leave that to you, Audrey. But Jerry from the Bahamas said, to what extent is the opposition involved in the consultation? And then in the same question, he also asked about the national security, kind of if there's any national security or implementations with the transparency policy, particularly thinking about kind of everything being digital. Do you have to have firewalls against mainland China? So not sure how much you can talk about that.
Sure. So it's interesting because I have three working conditions entering the cabinet. And the three are location independence. So wherever I work, I'm working. So that's why I get to have this office, right? I don't have to work in the administrative building. I can work literally anywhere. So that's the first condition. The second condition is voluntary association. My office is volunteers from each and every ministry, at most one per ministry. And so that means that by joining at my office, I'm not giving them orders. I'm not taking orders from any minister, but I make sure that people are working in this kind of safe space so that they can work out aloud. But because it's voluntary, so not all 32 ministries have joined my office. For example, the Minister of Defense never sent anyone. Neither did the Council for Continental China Affairs, for obvious reasons. And so because of that, I don't force those ministers to work in radical transparency. Rather, they send people only when they have a pretty well-defined non-national secret, non-confidential line of work. Like the Foreign Service did send people to my office, but only work on public diplomacy. And because of this, there's a very clear delineation between the radical transparency and the national secret. So I don't know any national secret. So that's a simple answer. And my third working condition, by the way, is just radical transparency. And if you're interested in how that's applied in real life, we have a website called Say It. And say it just lists after I become the digital minister, the 1,000 or so meetings with 4,000 or so people where we talk about 200,000 of things. And this is our not just meeting summaries, they're actually full transcriptions of all the visits from all the lobbyists, all the interviews, as well as the internal meetings that I'm a chair of, so that people can very freely quote each other and continue the discussion one at a time, and making sure that they're adding to the public conversation instead of detracting from the public conversation. So I hope that answers this part of the question.
Yeah, thanks so much. And if you don't mind dropping the link to that in the chat box so people can have a look at that website,
Sure
that
thing.
would be great.
I'll drop two links. One is the Say It platform, and another is in an answer to the New Zealand question about exactly who did we collaborate with. So that's just a specific answer to the question on the answered section.
Thank you for both of those. And so one final question from me. As you
Mhm.
know, our partner along with Island Innovation for putting on this event is the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and
Mhm.
Taiwanese politics and international relations being as complex as it is.
Mhm.
I know that you were recently at the UN General Assembly, and I was wondering if
Mhm.
you could quickly tell us a little bit about your interactions with OECS and other SIDS countries, and what Taiwan's role has been there, and what your trip to the UNGA was like.
Sure. So I actually had a really good conversation. I tweeted about it. Actually, you can read all about it on my Twitter. That people really appreciated that we can drive intergenerational solidarity. So, for example, there was a tweet where I had a conversation with Comrade Ralph Gonsalves, and with his daughter, and at the St. Vincent and Grenadines UN delegation. And we talk about how to use digital technologies to make sure that your young people feel engaged, even if they're far away from their home, engaged with the decision making from their homelands, and also making sure that people can understand the full context of each political conversation without being trapped into a single side of the conversation, like disinformation and so on. So I would like to encourage you just follow my Twitter, and I would also like to, because we're down to the final minute now, to share my job description with you, which is again pinned on my Twitter, but it's customary for me to explain the three sustainable goals that I'm working specifically as the digital minister, and my interpretation of the three goals, which are 1718, 1717, and 176, to move away from a traditional ICT machine-oriented way of thinking about digital, but rather a humanity-based way of thinking about digital. And so my job description, written 3 years ago in New Zealand, actually, is like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that the singularity is near, let's always remember the plurality is here. Thank you so much for your great questions.
And thank you so much. What a great note to end on. I think there are a few more questions, but apologies, we don't have time to answer those. But I'm sure if you tweet Audrey, she might be able to respond to some of them. I really appreciate your time joining us, Minister Tang. It's been a fantastic session. I think there's a lot of applicability to our people around the world, and I know that there's going to be a lot of interest from the recording of this as well. So we'll make sure to distribute that through Twitter and other social media as well. I also wanted to mention that we also have another Taiwanese speaker this week to everyone joining, Daniel Hung from Penghu County, which is one of the, actually, I didn't know this as someone working in islands, that Taiwan had many different other islands, smaller island communities off of the main island. And obviously one of the challenges has been the language barrier sometimes with building those interactions with islands across Asia. So we're really trying to find ways to engage more with islands in Asia to build those links, Okinawa and Japan, as well as various South Korean islands. Anyway, Daniel will be talking on the Blue Economy panel tomorrow about what Penghu County would like to do in terms of engaging that blue economy. So thank you everyone who's joined us, really appreciate it. Our next panel coming up in an hour or so is quite different, looking at the Arctic and issues for Arctic communities. And we've got a fantastic range of speakers joining that. So don't forget to follow on Facebook, Island Innovation. All of these sessions are live streamed there. We also have the Islands Innovate Twitter account, and you should follow posts for updates there. And thank you everyone for joining. That's it. Have a great day. Thank you
Thank you,
once
and
again,
have a
Mr.
great
Tang.
local time. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.